The Cost of Education, Strategic Planning for Families to Afford Private School Fees. Join the bucket list accountant himself, David Patterson, as he explores the vital steps to plan for private school education. Discover why early planning, understanding costs, and regular savings are key. Learn from personal anecdotes, financial tips, and the importance of family discussions. Perfect for parents wanting to balance education goals with other life priorities. I'm your host, Anthony Pearl. Let's get into making your bucket list happen. David, I wanted to ask you about planning for private school. It's a big thing these days. I don't know what the actual percentage of kids that are in private school versus public school are. And of course, it may vary whether it's infants, primary, high school, but it's a big ticketed item. How do you sit down with people and start discussing that? How early do you start discussing plans for children to be in private school?
I think, and I remember, just to digress a fraction here, when our twins were, when we were first told people at work that we were having our first child, or turned out to be two kids, one of the office manager came to me not long afterwards and he handed me pamphlets to private schools in Melbourne, which outlined how much it was going to cost to send the kids to private school. And his suggestion to me was, these are two really good schools. You should start saving now to make sure that you can afford to send your kids to private school when the time comes. Now, he didn't even ask me if I wanted to send my kids to private school, but he just gave me the brochure and said, now's the time to start. And so any conversation like that, ideally the best time to start doing it is not long after the people have had the child, and you never know what the future holds, but if private school's important to them and something that they want to send their kids to, then let's start planning for it right from day one. Have a look at what school, and a lot of people will have a school that they want to send their kids to. Maybe they went to that school, maybe it's got a good reputation. So you can find out how much it costs to send someone to that school now, and then just start saving for it, even though it's, by the time your child goes to the school, it's going to be a lot more in fees. But if you start from the day that they're born, it's a bit like a savings plan that a lot of people used to do anyway for their kids, put $10, $20, whatever it is, into a bank account for them later on. That you're doing the same thing except for private school fees.
And it's an interesting one to know not just how early to start, and as you say, maybe it's even from when you start planning kids, but certainly once they're born, if that is something that's on the radar. But it's also a question of how much do you start putting aside, because again, of course, it depends on your plan. Is your plan to put child in private school from 5 years old in infant school, or do you wait until they're in high school, whatever it might be?
Yep.
But how do you know how much to start putting aside?
I think from my perspective, I think the only way you can plan that is to get a feel for how much it costs now, and have a feel to say, okay, well, I think I want to send my child to private school from the very start. So you then know that you've got, I'm way out of whack here, but 6 or 7 years to plan before your child goes to prep or grade 1. So you're not going to have all the money in that period of time, but as long as you set up a regular savings plan, and hopefully by the time you get to the first year, you've got enough saved up for a couple of years maybe, you then just keep the savings plan rolling along and increasing it as the school fees increase. I think that's about the only way you can really do it. You can never do it with certainty to say, okay, I know by this stage I'm going to have this much money in there, but at least you can make a really good start on it so that by the time you send your kids to private school, you're not then trying to sort of find the money to send them.
When you're doing something like this, is it simply a matter of advising people to say, just put it in a separate bank account and leave it there? Are there other ways that you should be looking at it? Because there are dedicated funds and things, or at least I remember there being when my children were young, being offered those kinds of ideas. Is it worth also exploring where you put the money?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's be a good idea to have a conversation with a financial planner at that stage about your whole situation, and they would be able to advise the options that you've got as to where the money can go. Some areas will be potentially a little more riskier than others, depending on what type of investment or platform that you're going into. But I think at that point in time, a discussion with a financial plan is going to be the best opportunity for you to explore all options and decide on the fit that's best for you.
When you start in the planning process, though, how easy is it for families to be realistic about what they can and can't afford and whether it's going to be a reality or not, and how they deal with that, particularly early on? Because, if you're asking people to start doing this basically as the child's being born, it's a difficult discussion.
Yes, yeah, it is. It's very difficult, but it then comes back to how important it is to them, I think. So if sending their kids to school is an important aspect of what they want to do, they want to be able to get their kids through private school, then the conversation needs to be had really early, and sort of honest conversations need to be had as well, depending on their income, people's income levels. It could mean that there need to be some sacrifices made in those early years as you're saving money, which, they may or may not want to do, but ultimately what you're trying to do is help them achieve something that they want to do. So you can only sort of lay it out. And the earlier you start those conversations, the better, because you don't know what's going to happen in the future. And really all you can do is put aside what you can put aside. So if that only $100 a week or $50 a week to start with, get the habit formed of regularly putting money aside for something. Then as circumstances change, you might get to a point, a few pay increases, changes of job, business goes better, start putting a little bit more money aside. But I think the habit of regular contributions into something is probably just as important as how much is going in.
This podcast is brought to you by bucketlistacounting.com.au. Speak to David Patterson and his team if you want to take better control of your life and business, helping small business owners like you be successful designing the life of your dreams. Go to bucketlistacounting.com.au or check out the show notes for more information. Now back to the program. Imagine as well, this goes back to topic that the show's about, the bucket list. There's also got to be a priority level, doesn't it? Because you might be sacrificing some things that may be less expensive in the bucket list. It may not be that you're sacrificing the Ferrari. You might be sacrificing, the holiday.
Yep.
So that conversation about priorities, particularly at that early phase,
Yep.
is very important, isn't it?
It certainly is, and it's a very interesting point you raise, because I think one of the questions that you've got to ask people if they want to be, especially from birth, that their plan is to send their kids to private school, is to find out why they want to send their kids to private school, and try and delve into what they think the advantages are of sending their kids to private school, as opposed to sending them to a public school, and making sure that they understand, I guess, the purpose behind wanting to send them to private school. And I think if you can get that slightly deeper level of understanding of why they're doing it, it can make a big difference in helping them work towards achieving it. Because if it's a really important aspect, and for whatever their reason, and as long as they understand that along the way they may be sacrificing a holiday or something else, as long as they're then happy with that at the start, it makes it a lot easier. But I think understanding the purpose of why they want to send their kids to private school is the important part of the whole thing, rather than just, I want to send my kids to private school. Just a deeper understanding.
I know what you mean. It is a really important decision. And sometimes you say it's just, well, I went to a private school, therefore my kids should go to a private school. It doesn't necessarily ring true. And it's a difficult one as well, because when you're making a decision at, child just being born age, and it may be a decision about high school rather than infants and primary. So, which is, I guess, more common, that people tend to send their kids more commonly to a private high school. They make that decision. And that is very much, it's a gamble, because you don't know what that school's going to be like in 12 years' time when that becomes applicable. And that's that's an interesting thing as well, because you could be, and also trying to project what those fees are going to be in 12
Mhm.
months' time. I mean, I look at what I knew fees were when my children are older, like yours, and they're past school, but I know what they were when they first started school. I've heard other people talking about what they are now, and well, they're probably doubled
Yeah.
in that period of time. And being able to cope with that and recognize that, as I know, I remember some of my friends talking about the fact that they had 3 kids, and at one point the school fees were significantly more than the mortgage.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it certainly is. It's a massive risk. Not so much risk, but it's a massive undertaking to send the kids to school, and you don't know what the school's going to be like by the time your kids get there. But you also, I don't think private schools suited for every child as well. You know, they may be better suited in a different school. So it's a really tricky one. And I guess all you can really do is plan that this is what we want to do, and then be flexible enough that once it gets into that phase that you can change at any point if it doesn't turn out how you thought it was going to turn out. You know, if it turns out that the school fees have tripled in price and you just can't afford them, you know, it doesn't, your best intentions may not get you to the end result, given income levels and spending levels. But I think as long as you attack it with as great an endeavor as you can, but with the understanding that there's more to life, you know, private school, and again, I don't want to downplay private school, the importance of it, or school in general, but it doesn't always necessarily, it's not the be all and end all of what you do in your life. So
Yeah.
I think be careful of yourself into the one area.
I suppose the bonus is that if you have for a few years saved a bunch of money and you make the decision for any number of reasons that that child is not going to go to private school, the good thing is you've got a whole bunch of savings sitting in there that you can put towards other things
Absolutely.
that may be on your bucket list. But I think also there is the flip side is also that you can also get to a realization where we need the money. It's not even about the bucket list.
100%.
It's saying, yes, we have saved X $1,000, but we need it for, again, any number of reasons.
Yep.
And both of those must be difficult conversations and long conversations as well before you make that kind of judgment.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I guess like at the end of the day, we all want what's best for our kids, and we want to give our kids the best possible opportunity and the best possible start through early learning and through school. But there are also things that come up through that whole, I mean, we're talking 17, 18 years period, aren't we? So it's a long time. And as you said, at any stage through that journey, things can come up that causes you to look at the money you might have saved or the cost of the private school and say, gee, we need this for another area. And that's okay. You know, things pop up. And again, at the end of the day, all you're doing is trying to do the best that you possibly can. And if you need to divert money to some other immediate cause, that's what you've got to do. You know, you can always get back on track a bit later on, but yeah, you've got to be a little flexible on the whole thing.
And when you talk to this kind of bucket list, and let's just for the moment say it is about high school rather than the junior years. I mean, how involved in a conversation of this do you have to bring the child in? Because it's a family discussion, isn't it? This is, because it's about more than just the money is a consequence of a decision that is being made, but it is a decision that child has to understand to a certain degree.
Yeah, it is. And it's a difficult one because our kids didn't go to private school, so we didn't have that conversation, but I can only, I would have thought you should involve the child as much as possible, given to a point. I mean, obviously, as the parents, it's still kind of your decision to make what you think's in the best interest of the child. But I think the more you can involve them, the easier any conversation will be all along the journey.
Yeah, and I think it is relative, isn't it? It's again, if you're a 12-year-old and you said, well, you can go to private school or we can go to Disneyland. I know which way most kids are going, right?
Yeah.
So you do have to give it a little bit of perspective on it, but it is a significant decision. It does have large consequences because, as you say, the majority of private schools, and I know there are some that are definitely cheaper than others, but a lot of private high schools we're talking big money. In some cases, it's almost a full-time job to just pay the school fees if you've got 2 or 3 children.
Oh, 100% it is. And it's a massive commitment to make. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But, and again, if that's something that's important, then you make plans around it. And so someone does go to work and the sole purpose of them being at work is to pay for the school fees. But that's a choice because sending your kids to the private school is high on your list of priorities of what you want to do and how you want to help the child have the best possible start in life that you can have.
I think it's an interesting one just to kind of wrap up this conversation. I'm just thinking about the younger people that are out there at the moment. That's not at the point where they're planning children just yet. And the variation that you have in your bucket list where, once you become a parent, you do think, okay, maybe private school is on my bucket list and I need to thinking about it. And the counter of that is at the earlier phases, well, it's not something you need to think about so much because it's not top on the bucket list, but it actually might promote other things on your bucket list of things to do, knowing full well that, well, look, maybe we're 5 or 6 years away from having children, but at the point that we have children, we need to start saving for this. So in the meantime, whatever that period is, it could be a year, it could be 5 years, whatever the couple plans, that bucket list might alter and might push things up on that list because of knowing that where it's going to be in the future.
Absolutely. And I would think in that category would be a lot of travel options to make sure that a lot of that travel gets done before you have kids and before the additional costs of having kids come on top. So certainly I think the priority of, and again, it's understanding what's important to people. For some, it might be making sure they've bought a house as early as possible. Others, it might be making sure that they get out and see the world. And as long as you have an understanding of what those things are, you're right that if you can nail some of those before kids, it'll certainly make the next phase of it a lot easier.
The Bucket List Accountant podcast is brought to you by David Patterson and his team at Bucket List Accountant. Go and visit their website for more information, details, of course, in the show notes. I'm Anthony Pearl, your host from Podcast Done For You. We look forward to having your company in the next episode.